I know what we did in our lab. I know roughly how the Alice interface looks, but I don't know exactly the nitty-gritty details or thoughts that went into. So how did you, what design considerations are there now in this Alice interface or Alice challenge game?
Yeah, so the game, there were a couple of things that we really wanted to get right there. Is that we already have a lot of studies that look into how an individual tries to optimize search. As I mentioned before, often some artificial problems. So we needed a game interface where people could clearly see what they did. They got point feedback, which they got from the actual physics experiment 35 seconds later. And then they could adapt their solution. So they got their former solution and they had to submit the next one and they could manipulate that. But we also wanted to get to this collective search element. So there was also a leaderboard. So you could see in your group of 5, you could see who was currently the best one and who scored the most points, so to say, who had cooled down the most atoms. You could click on their solution, see what their solution looked like, and then further manipulate that. Yeah. So there was a lot of transparency, both in terms of what you yourself did, what the best current score was, but also how you could learn from that, click on that solution, and then manipulate that further. That really enabled us to, in a very detailed way, when we analyze the data, see how much do I change my solution depending on my feedback, depending on how well I do, but also how much do I change the solution of whoever I'm copying, whoever I'm sort of learning from. But it was all still in a controlled sense that I couldn't speak to anyone, I couldn't write, I couldn't ask questions. And we needed it still to be very controlled. We needed to be able to track exactly what information people had and what information people were responding to. So if I could have asked questions and someone else could have answered it, it would just have opened up a lot more uncertainty about what was actually going on. So that's how we ended up with this game design. It's very simple in some way. You have 3 lines that you should manipulate, and you have that information about others. So it's not the most enthusiastic game design maybe in the world, but it was clearly interesting enough for people to engage with and to keep them occupied for an hour, which was the extent of the experiment.
Is there any hypothesis why people can successfully optimize in such a setting?
I think that's an example of where there can be an advantage of people not knowing the theory behind. They didn't know that there were functions behind underlying it all. But I think if you'd studied physics and some of the participants they probably had an intuition about that, but didn't know the sort of exact functions. So that meant that people simply were looking at 3 lines that they had to manipulate. They had gotten a brief video sort of indicating what these 3 lines were linking to. But all they were really responding to was the performance feedback. And then maybe their intuition about this is an atom that has to be cooled down.
So what does performance feedback
mean? So they got... in round 2, I try out something, maybe I'm confused, I drag the line here and I drag the line there, and the other line I drag in the opposite direction, and then I see what happens. If I score 0 points, I either just try out something new again, or I look at the leaderboard and say, okay, we're in the 3rd round now. Has anyone picked up on anything useful? And then I might do social learning, and then I might take advantage of the leaderboard. I click on copy the best, and then I'm considering, okay, how do I then further advance that? And then we get to this finding of how much you then change whatever solution you have in front of you depends on how well you did in the past.
Okay, so if I was good,
then you did small modifications because you think now I'm in a good spot.
Yes.
If you're doing poorly, maybe because you're confused or maybe because you just want to try out something completely different. We can't see in the brain of people. We can only look at the behavior.
Yes.
So we don't exactly know what they're thinking, but we can see that the behavior is fundamentally different between people that do well and people that don't do well.
Okay.